Hey there, this is Cooper from Telepathic Bunny Comics, and I am here with Aardvark Comics. Is that the way you say it?
That's correct, yeah.
All
Well, it's
righty,
not Aardvark Comics, it's just Aardvark.
just
Um,
Aardvark.
yeah, just
That's
Aardvark.
all
My
right.
comics company will be, the name will be announced when the project launches on July 17th. July 15th, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, okay, all right. Just the Aardvark, the comics Aardvark.
That's
Gotcha.
right, that'll do.
you gotta. I forgot to put the YouTube channel below. I'll have to correct that as soon as
No
this is
problem,
over
you
with.
could post a link in the chat or something.
Okay, I did put a link to our Right Stuff interview, and I got a link to your sign up for Aquila. So,
It sounds good, that sounds good.
all right. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to write science fiction. Okay, science fiction has some very specific issues. Namely, it tends to be technical. I'd say the biggest obstacle. Wouldn't you say that?
I would definitely say that. And, one of the things that comes under scrutiny a lot in science fiction is definitely the accuracy. Um,
Right.
like, and that's always going to be a problem. And I think it's something that, as we've gone, as we've gone through the 20th and into the 21st century with the genre, there's
Mm-hmm.
been continual scientific developments, um, and those obstacles kind of become more and more prevalent the more people learn about um, physics and
Mm-hmm.
science in general. And I think as science is starting, like science has sort of become in its own way like a subculture where a lot of people are invested in science and they take a lot of interest in science just kind of on the by.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a long time ago, in the time of like Flash Gordon comics and Buck Rogers and Dan Dare, like people were not too as invested in science fiction and in science um, as a category unless you worked in that field.
Right. Right. Um, yeah, I think when you look at some of the like earlier science fiction before like information became so prevalent, like the internet really boosted people's knowledge,
Hmm.
or accessible, maybe not their knowledge, but accessibility to double check and look up stuff,
Yeah,
Um, and used to you had to go to a library or have a book in your personal collection,
yeah,
but
or be academically trained in the subject.
right. But when you look at that old science fiction, things like H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds and things like that,
Hmm.
the science speak tended to be a lot more vague and a lot more speculative.
Yeah,
Uh, like when you read the Time Machine really didn't specifically say how the time machine worked, just that it did.
yeah.
You know, uh, oh, we got the Raiden radio. It's like, woo, two people I like.
That's good
Okay.
to see.
We like you too, man. We like you too.
Hail Raiden.
Yeah, he's a very technical minded individual. I did the right stuff with him too. Um, but the but when you look at it, they're a lot more conceptual and they were a lot more like everything wasn't really nailed down. Now you read like Michael Crichton, for instance, right? Michael Crichton, man, he nailed everything down. He not only told you what what the science fiction was, but he told you how the science fiction would work.
Yeah.
Like timeline, he talked about quantum foam and timeline, and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, which is where I learned some pretty much all of my quantum theory, from
Yeah.
reading him. Got Odin Dasco over here. Hey, fellas, Missed the Information Society intro. Dang it. Very interested in subject matter today, though. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
agree.
so, what would you say about the difference between old science fiction and the new breed?
Okay, so I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to put um we need to identify the paradigm shift. What
Mm-hmm.
was it that boosted scientific science fiction, so to speak? what separated that from like pulp space adventures? You know,
Right.
what was the moment? What was the series or book or whatever that
Hmm.
caused that to happen? And I think it was Star Trek. I think
Star
the
Trek.
advent of Star Trek,
Oh.
Star Trek, Dune, and Star Wars all came out within, I think, a 10-year gap.
Oh. Okay.
And I think Star Trek in particular was more, it was way more scientific than a lot of the other so-called science fiction at the time.
Hmm.
So I think that was the moment where it all changed. Before that, you had comics, and you had comics like Dan Dare. You had which is a lot of people don't really know.
Yeah.
I consider there's like a trinity of pulp space adventure heroes. There
Yeah.
was Buck Rogers, there was Flash Gordon, and then there was Dan Dare. Dan Dare is the lesser known of the three. He was British,
Hmm. Yeah.
um, but he was an incredibly popular character in England and during that time. He used to sell
Right.
something like 750,000 copies a week, which is when you
Wow.
consider, you know, rationing was still in effect until 1954 in Britain, that
Yeah.
they were selling, you know, fairly well.
Hmm.
So um, before Star Trek, things were a lot more hand wavy. You could
Right.
say that there were life forms, there was a civilization on Venus,
Yeah.
for example. After Star Trek, we would say nothing can live on Venus because it's a volcanic hellhole full of
Yeah.
sulfuric gas and basically vaporized acid,
Right.
and
Right.
you know it's just hell on hell, a hell
Yeah.
planet.
Right. Right. But you know, from a distance telescope, it looks like green and
It
lush.
looks
You
green
know.
and lush.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ours is not to wonder why. Ours is to put pastrami on rye. Okay.
I don't
Well, thanks
know.
for that. Thanks for that contribution,
I
Raiden.
don't know what that means, but I'll go. I will take it to heart. Thank you, Raiden.
You seem to have the munchies, Raiden. You might want to grab a bite to eat there. Okay. Anyway. uh, well, you know, I grew up with like the Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers. You know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the Gil Gerard, Buck Rogers, and I also grew up with reruns of Star Trek, and I guess you got some science fiction with Outer Limits.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that show? Um, but you know, the thing about those things, they were all about like they were like very human stories, but
Yeah.
they're told like with the fantastical, you know, like Buck Rogers, you know, launched into orbit in a 20 and then got out of orbit. You know, his trajectory went too far out and he was frozen until they discovered him like in the 25th and a half century or whatever.
Yeah.
And and then, you know, that's you know, that I mean, we know that's technically impossible, you know, for somebody to be cryogenically frozen and then
Yeah.
regenerated, you know. But you know, at that time, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, well, that
Yeah.
works,
You
you know.
could just look in medieval times.
Yeah,
In medieval times, the certain churches would claim to have certain relics, and so like there would be a church in Barcelona that claimed to have the Holy Grail, and there
right,
would be a church in, say, France that would claim to have the Holy Grail, and it was never disputed.
yeah.
It was just believed that the Holy Grail was in two places at once, and they don't need to explain it.
Shroud of Turin, you
What
know.
about it?
Well, I mean, that's never been technically proven, you know, or they never really allowed it to be investigated, you know, uh,
I'm on
thoroughly.
the side
So,
that it's
yeah.
authentic, but
Hmm. Okay.
my point is that people would just accept that, you know, sort of illogical things
Right.
like that, where an object can exist in two places at once,
Right.
was a reality. And I think with early science fiction, and you've kind of got to have that sort of approach to things where nothing doesn't need everything. Bleh, excuse me. Not
Yeah.
everything needs to be explained scientifically or logically. Like
Right.
things in fiction, you can just hand wave it away. and
Yeah.
the majority of the audience will accept it if you. So, but if you're going into the genre and you're being uber technical,
Yeah.
you're being extremely technical, and then you say something completely out of the blue, like a planet can exist in 2 points of the universe at the same time,
Right.
then people are like, hang on, that's a bit wacky. So it depends on if you go into it with a certain
uh,
approach. Like Doctor Who is kind of like that. In Doctor Who, they
yeah.
just hand wave things. It's like it's time travel.
Reverse the neutron flow.
Yeah, reverse the polarity
Yeah.
of the neutron flow, and
That's it.
um,
Reverse the polarity of the neutron
so
flow.
like
I'm sorry.
they have that kind of approach where
I'm
it's
sorry.
just like science doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to write a story about
Mm-hmm.
an alien time traveler and encountering,
Mm.
potato men or whatever.
Got a couple comments over here. Never been into sci-fi, but love hearing passionate people discuss areas of literature I don't know. All right, thank you, Raiden. Superhero comics are suspended. All was a scientific explanation for the sake of fun, and we ate it up. Yep,
He's
we
right.
sure did. We sure
Yeah.
did. I remember people like Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry. I remember a short story that I read in one of those compilations that you get for literature class that has all these short stories and stuff in it.
Hmm.
And there was this really interesting story about a Venetian colony. We were talking about Venus earlier. Uh, and evidently on Venus, the sun would only come out to shine on this colony like once a year,
Right.
and so this girl came who remembered the sun, remembered what it was like to be out in the sun, and she was depressed that she couldn't see the sun, and she was like, wistfully talking about the sun so much that they got mad at her, and they like shoved her in a closet. Okay.
Yeah.
And what they didn't realize was that day was the day that the sun was going to shine, and so they all that the sun came out, and they're like, oh wow, and they went out and played in the sun, and it might be
Hmm.
the first time in a year, and but then they got back inside after the sun went away, and then suddenly somebody's like, wait, she's still in the closet. and
Right.
and then they're like, they all sadly went to the closet to let her out, knowing that they robbed her of the sun, that she'd been wistfully talking about. Um, but it's a very human story. But I mean, the set is set in a science fiction setting. But you see that a lot in science fiction. You see a lot of it's fantastical settings, and there's a lot of this technical jargon flying around, but they can tell some very human stories.
Yeah.
Um, in a way that it's almost like it's almost like ripping people out of the frame that they have for right now. You look for the frame, you look for the human aspect of it to give yourself a grounding point. And so when things happen to the humans in the science fiction uh, story, then it's almost like it resonates a little bit more.
Mm.
Uh, and
Well,
when you look at how Star Trek and Star Wars has just really resonated through generation to generation because it doesn't age, because it's
no.
supposedly set in a time long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really age unless you put politics into it, but that's another thing. Entirely.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing with classic Trek, and
Yeah.
there. I remember I was trying to really get into Trek a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and like Discover. I watched like 2 or 3 episodes of Discovery, and I thought this is absolute trash. But then
Yeah.
I started watching the original series, with Kirk and Spock and
Right.
Uhura and so on.
Yeah.
And I got like 17 episodes in, and I was like, I'm enjoying this so much more than
Right.
the stuff I was like with all the modern special effects. I'm
Yeah.
enjoying the stuff where they've got like jelly beans as buttons on cardboard dashboards,
Right.
and I'm
Right.
enjoying that a lot more because it's so engrossing that I don't actually have to pay attention to the wobbly sets or the,
Right.
Lee.
Or them
Um,
all lurching to the side,
yeah,
you
like
know,
it
and the
it
camera tilting.
overcame those hurdles for me. And
Yeah.
for a lot of people, they would be difficult to overcome those hurdles. But for me,
Right.
um, I thoroughly got into it, and
Right.
yeah, so like I kind of got digging into that.
Yeah. Belmont says hell, and I still have my curlers in my hair, but I'm up. All right. Thanks for showing up, Belmont.
Welcome.
Okay. Uh, well, you know, when you read, like like people like Doctor Who, they get these older science fiction stories, and it's a lot more speculative. It was a lot more like about, um, just basically the story and basically the character interactions and what was happening, and and it was a lot. There was a lot to overcome visually, with the wobbly sets and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
if you can get people to suspend their disbelief, or suspend their, you know, concern with the surroundings, and the, uh, the visual, what they're getting, uh, and get them just to buy in to what's happening. And there's, a lot of that Doctor Who, the older stuff, like Tom Baker stuff,
Hmm.
uh, just like Pete Davidson. I think for some reason Pete Davidson resonates with me more than most of them. I don't know why, but you
Hmm.
watch that stuff, and even with modern eyes, and some people are like, "Oh, those sets were so rickety." I was like, "Yeah, but did you watch the story? Did you see the character interaction? Did you see the conceptual thinking that was involved? You
Yeah,
know, they had this high concepts, these, you know, things that they were asking you to, to kind of wrap your brain around.
yeah.
And in some ways, the concepts made up for the sets.
There's a
Uh,
scene in an episode of Doctor Who called Genesis of the Daleks
yep, yep,
where Tom Baker's Doctor Who, so he's the fourth Doctor, is
mm-hmm,
confronting the creator of the Daleks before he has created the Daleks.
yep,
And he says to Davros, which is his name, he says, if
yep.
you had a vial of a disease that would wipe out all life in the universe, would you open it? Or something like that.
Yeah.
And Davros says, he kind of deliberates on it and he says, yeah, I would, simply for the scientific observation of seeing how the disease mutates and adapts, and how it would wipe out all the universe. And I
Mm-hmm.
was kind of thinking, like, that question, although it's, he's talking to a sort of a maniacal supervillain,
Right.
effectively,
Right.
it's addressing a genuine scientific concern
Yeah.
about overstepping into scientific research, and the dangers
I
that
think there's
could
some
come.
people that really should have watched that episode
I completely
working in
agree.
science
I
today.
completely agree. And so that kind of leads me into the next
Uh-huh.
conundrum that I come across as a science fiction writer
Mm-hmm.
and also as a Catholic.
Ah,
A
okay.
lot of what science preaches, when I say science, I mean capital S,
Yeah.
pop science preaches, is
Yeah.
inherently
The
against
science.
the
The
science,
science.
conflicts
Right.
with a lot of what my religious beliefs.
Right.
And
Right.
while I'm not like a biblical literalist,
Mm-hmm.
there are questions that I'm kind of confronted with, like, do I want to engage in this line of thought, because
Right.
it sends a message that I'm not necessarily sure I want people to be reading as
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's a passionate Catholic.
Yeah.
And like, there's a saying that, like, unless it challenges you, I can't remember what is it. It's the saying is like, you can't change unless you're challenged, or something like that.
Okay. Right.
Um
That's close
If it
enough for
doesn't
horseshoes
challenge
and
you, it
hand
doesn't
grenades. I
change you. That's it.
understand. I understand what you're getting at, even if you don't have the exact wording of
Yeah,
it.
if
You know.
it, I think it's if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you, is what
Uh,
the saying is. But
right.
often I'll be confronted with, I'll be writing something and I'll be writing something completely absurdist about like cosmic entities and great gods and all this sort
Yeah.
of stuff. And then I kind of step
Right.
back and I'm like, well, do I really want to be preaching that there are other deities besides,
Right.
Yahweh? Do I
Yeah.
want that in my book? Do I want there to be precursor races that, came before man dwelling on the
Hmm.
planet? So the challenges of science fiction in that regard are kind of, it's sort of like a moral challenge that I come across as
Yeah.
as somebody who's a Christian.
Well, I had this conundrum myself in my book. It has a science fiction element. My whole book has this element of supernatural, but it also has a very science fiction based like building block to the
Mm-hmm.
world. And I had to was Jesus in this world, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if he was in this world, what does it say about God himself? And did he have the powers? Was these was this like science fiction element the reason he had his powers, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to ask these questions to myself. And is this something, what's the theology of this world I'm building, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, and it's once I realized, I was like, in a lot of ways, yeah, I got superheroes and stuff like that, but in a lot of ways, this is a science fiction story.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to ask the question to myself, uh, is this going to in any way, shape, or form hurt the luster of Christ, and
Mm-hmm.
what I believe him to be, and which is the Son of God, I believe him to be the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then the thing about it was I had to say, what is the principles that my story is advancing? What is the uh,
Mm-hmm.
what is the importance of the messages that is in my work to the culture at large? And and I kind of got around the Jesus thing, but by uh, saying, that I have a character that dates back to that time. And I was gonna say, later on, that this character had actually met him and could not and said, if he is one of us, he's the most powerful one I ever saw.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
just kind of like leave it open, you know.
Yeah. What I do is that if I'm ever writing like histories like that, where there are things like
Hmm.
precursors and there's always the deluge, there's always the
Yeah, right.
so there is that window where pre kind of flood
Yeah,
things that like God didn't like existed, that
right.
he wiped out through some kind of calamity.
Yeah.
And just then if you get into on a completely opposite side of the spectrum but in a similar kind of vague vein,
Hmm.
the
Right.
Graham Hancock stuff about like ancient civilizations that were wiped out in a calamity, you know
Yeah.
um
But
you
they won't go any further than that. It's like there was this big calamity sometime in the past, and we think it was a
the
meteor
comet,
that was,
yeah.
yeah, and then it's like there
Well,
was,
Graham
there's,
Hancock's
yeah.
got a very particular anti-Christian bias that really
I
comes
know,
through it. He goes
I
off
know,
the
I
wall
know.
if you even mention anything
Right.
Abrahamic. But um, his, the stories of the flood and all that kind of
Hmm.
provide us with a window as writers. And like, I don't want to be preachy. I don't want to include lots of like religious stuff in my book, because that's kind of the point of the point of the movement that we're involved in,
Yeah.
is not to be preachy and not to push our
Right.
beliefs in obvious and obnoxious ways.
Yeah.
And so, you know, luckily I do have the benefit of my comic takes place in a kind of Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers esque
Yeah.
world of weird aliens that exist in the solar system and don't really, it's not really beholden to any kind of, um, there's nothing in Catholicism that says like, you know,
Yeah.
aliens don't exist or whatever,
Right. Right.
um, or like thou shalt not write science fiction about aliens that live on Venus. There's none of that. So
Right. Right. Got a few comments over here. Bristolian Babe, all right, me babbers. He showed up. Hey, man. Ooh, sci-fi book I'm writing has a few sci-fi elements. Yeah, yeah. Reconciling faith and science from the standpoint of writing and creating is thick, and as you're sort of playing God in your own created universe. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. As writers, especially, with the anti-writer bias that we run into in this particular group we're in. One of the things that they don't understand is that all of these things have to be conceived of, all of these things have to be pulled out of the ether and made concrete before you can even get to the art.
mm-hmm.
But it also makes you the creator of your own universe and creator of your own world. And you have to write the rules for it, and you have to write how this works, especially if it's science fiction. Then you have an even bigger challenge because you have to like be very specifically know the concepts behind how this works. If you work in the magic genre, you can just go magic,
Yeah.
or the sci-fi or the fantasy thing. You can just magic. It's magic.
Well, that's why
Uh,
we've got science fantasy, which
right,
is Star
right.
Wars, where you have the
Yep,
idea
yep.
and then it's explained after the fact. And
Yeah, like you have all these science fiction elements, but then you have the Force,
yeah,
and it's not. I know you try to explain it later, but people kind of rejected explanation. Oh, they exist. Okay. Um, but it's specifically with science fiction, there's a like really thin line you have to walk. Michael Crichton, I did say that, I read a lot of his stuff, but at the same time, there were times where he would bog it down with these details or with being too pedantic,
mm-hmm,
about like Jurassic Park had like real long paragraphs on DNA sequencing and
mm-hmm,
and amphibian DNA and how amphibians can be both male, female, or change. And that's why they use amphibian DNA.
yeah,
Uh, and but in timeline, he made time travel boring. You know.
yeah.
In a lot of ways, and I'm like, how do you do that? How do you make time travel boring? Just do like H.G. Wells and say, "I've created the time machine." Just 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 know
Y-
that it's a time machine, or
yeah. Well, there's a vein of people that do enjoy the sort of technical aspect of science fiction.
right,
It
right.
really depends on, like, nobody would really. How do I? What am I trying to articulate here?
Mhm.
Scientific sci-fi concepts, science fiction novels and movies and books or whatever they
Yeah,
have to be absurd.
right.
They have to be kind of off the wall a little bit because nobody would really read a book about like, oh, we created a pill to solve
Yeah,
to solve like the common cold and nobody, that's not really that interesting, but
right.
a pill that allegedly cured the common cold but turned everyone into lizards. Now that's a book I want to read, you know?
Right, right. Um, well, yeah. I think also one of the big challenges is like when you got Dune, like when you read Brian Herbert's Dune, not Brian Herbert, but Frank Herbert. Sorry, Brian's his son.
Yeah.
When you Frank Herbert's Dune, you find that he created entire new technologies,
Mm-hmm.
in not only new technologies but entire new religions, new like structures, but he based them on like familiar things that we'd be familiar with, like the feudal system.
Yeah.
Uh, but then he like the spice and how spice interacts with space travel and how they create warps to other worlds, and the pilots are altered, to where they're barely human anymore and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing with the Arrakis mythologies and things like that. But when you go to write, um, these science fiction worlds, you find yourself running across, oh, I need to change this term to where it's not like familiar. If
Mm.
you see poorly written science fiction has terms that you recognize, or they describe things, it's like, wait a second, this is supposed to be like 2,000 years from now. Why are they still talking about why are they still playing Sabotage by the Beastie Boys? You
Yeah.
know, I mean, like the J.J. Abrams
Well,
keeps
you
going,
like you could
you know.
argue, the answer to that is why are people still playing Beethoven on piano? Like
Well,
I'm not
that's true.
comparing the
That's
Beastie
true,
Boys to
right?
Beethoven, but my
Some
point
would, some would, but
my point is that like music and art and like recorded literature, I guess, and recorded art
yeah,
kind of does
yeah,
transcend time in that way, which is kind of fortunate that we invented that technology.
mm-hmm.
But if people, it would be strange if you were reading a book, if you were reading like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and you saw the
Right,
word okay.
yeah,
That word is like a very 20th century word, and I don't think people actually realize how
right,
kind of archaic it is. And
yeah,
um, I watch some I watch a few Japanese mangas and stuff like that,
yeah,
and
right,
they like Naruto is a good example, right? So I used to, when I was watching Naruto, I'd watch it in the Japanese, and I can understand a little bit of Japanese. I can speak a little Japanese. Um, and so I've and I always watch it in Japanese, and then
mm-hmm.
it'll be set in this universe where the country of Great Britain does not exist, right?
Right,
So
yeah,
therefore, the English language does not exist, right?
ah, right, yeah,
And yet they will be using modern Japanese terms that have been taken from English,
right,
and um, and the characters will. It's not even things like that. The characters would also say things like "okay." The characters
mm-hmm.
would say things like "thank you" in English.
Yeah,
They take
right,
that and stuff like that. Where it doesn't make sense that that would exist. Now you go to the extremes of that, where you effectively you would have to create new words to describe new concepts, and
yeah,
you would overwhelm the audience in unfamiliar lingo and jargon,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that becomes what's called technobabble.
right,
um, and so like that's kind of a benefit of hand waving a lot of science away, is that you can just kind of say like, it's
yeah,
you could set your book so far in the future that you can basically just say, oh, it's science magic, it doesn't matter,
right,
like.
right, yeah, that's true. Hold on a second. Bristolian Dave says down to earth science fiction is boring. I want nanotech suits and giant kaiju fuckers.
Does he mean people
Kaiju.
that
I'm
F
sorry,
kaijus,
kaiju.
or does he mean
No, he's
kaijus
just
that are
saying.
effers?
No, no, he's. I don't think he's being literal.
I
Anyway,
know.
best change sci-fi turns. Meghead. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
pretty.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Signed up. This book looks like a cool project for
Thanks,
sure.
Shadowpunk.
Gotcha. Another one. Okay. Hello, sirs. Shadowpunk is definitely an interesting case. Because his world has some advanced technology, but his world is kind of like going back to almost Lord of the Flies dystopia,
Hmm.
and but then he's got like it's supposed to be set in the future, so there's some advanced technologies that his characters use. But then it's a grimy world, and it's kind of I mean, it's like Blade Runner, for instance. Blade
Yeah.
Runner was
That.
not a sanitized world; it was kind of like nasty, grimy world.
Oh
But then,
no,
I mean,
they made a point of making it look unpleasant to live there.
right, right. But then they like created these replicants, which is advanced technology.
Mm.
But then at the same time, they were basically essentially human, except for the test that they put them through, the Bechdel test,
Yeah.
and
No, not
and
it's
it
not the
would
Bechdel test. The Bechdel test is that feminist thing.
that's not the Bechdel test. Oh my God, that's the worst thing I probably said in my life. It's the Turing test.
Right.
Yeah, the Jonathan, the Turing test. Okay, my fault, my fault.
I saved you
I
there, mate. I saved you.
Yeah, you saved me. Oh my gosh, not the Bechdel test. Oh my God.
But that word that you
Anyway,
just said, that word dystopia, like
yeah,
that's a word that gets
yeah,
thrown around a lot, and I think people don't actually use it correctly anymore.
right,
Like people
right.
just use it to describe. I was watching a show called Vinland Saga. I think it
Uh
was
huh.
Vinland Saga,
Okay.
and it started off with this narration about like how the Viking period was hell, and
Yeah,
the word dystopia was used in the in the subtitles. I
yeah.
I think they even used it in Japanese as well.
Mm,
I'm not certain about that, but that threw me off because it's like that's a word that was invented in the 20th century to
right.
describe like Orwellian societies and
Societies that have broken down on a very human level,
the opposite of a
and
utopia,
right,
and it's a
right.
science fiction concept
Yeah,
that is sort of transcended into a social concept.
yeah. We did a show the other day on our favorite dystopias, and it's amazing how many have been in fiction. Um,
Hmm.
okay. Hello, sirs. Max Heshroom. Hate saying that. Uh, how you doing? Okay. Building worlds always runs into this issue. Rethinking the granular details is a mind bender. Yep.
He's right, yeah.
Cyberpunk aesthetic, high tech, low life. Yeah.
Yeah, it sums it up
Yeah.
perfectly.
Max Headroom doing all right. Okay. Yeah. Uh, yeah. That's true. You know that whole thing about the cyberpunk and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, but getting back to the human stories you can tell when the advanced technology thing is almost what is the Carl Sagan that said that sufficiently advanced technology can look like magic to
I
the
think that was Ray
less
Bradbury.
evolved minds. Ray Bradbury. Okay.
I think that was
Uh,
Bradbury. We could both be wrong though, so I'm not
yeah,
sure.
we could both be
It
wrong,
definitely
right?
wasn't
I
Carl Sagan.
I think it was okay. All right. Well, whoever said it,
Hmm.
that tends to be the building block of my universe because a
Yeah.
lot of things. I like kind of broke it down to like there's a science fiction element, but at the same time I kind of allow for there to be spirituality and some
Hmm.
magical elements, whether it's the stuff or not. I
Well,
don't really clarify. So
one of one of my favorite Star Trek episodes
yeah.
is The Inner Light. I don't know
Oh
if you remember The Inner Light or if you've even ever seen it.
yeah, I think I have. Yeah,
So The
that
Inner
sounds
Light
very
is an episode
familiar.
of Star Trek where um, Picard lands on this planet
Mm,
where he gets effectively stranded on the planet and he can never get back onto the Enterprise, and he lives out his entire life, and he gets a new name and he gets a
yeah,
family, and
learns to
he
play the flute.
learns to play the flute, and there's all these events take place,
Right.
and I don't want to spoil the ending, but
Yeah.
um, it's a very kind of wild concept that I don't think even in Star Trek, which is on the sort of more technical side of science fiction,
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
um,
Right.
it's a very um, it's a very strange episode, but it is possibly the most touching and tear jerking episode as well.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is this is
Right.
from Picard. This is from the Next Generation Shadowpunk.
Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely from the next generation, not Picard. No,
No, but I
that's
was talking
definitely
about
not for
Captain
Picard.
Picard. Yeah.
The Captain Picard, right? Um, yeah, I remember one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek ever. was an episode of Voyager, um, where the Doctor gets sent as a program to save his own creator, and it turns out when he gets there, he finds out that his entire line has been basically consigned to slave labor, you know. And oh, by the way, they all look like his creator, and so his creator sees him coming, and it's like this wonderful uh, kind of like dichotomy there of like the creation and the creator,
Mm-hmm.
having a conversation, or having this conflict. And it was like it's almost father son, but at the same time creator creation,
Yeah.
and it worked on so many levels. I mean, Voyager was such hit and miss. I mean, they had some god awful episodes, but then every once in a while there'd just be this gem, like the planet that was out of phase, or was like faster, moving faster, and so everything that Voyager did, that they actually had a religion built up around the Voyager being in orbit, and, and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And um, but when you get to like the high concepts, when you get to like the humanity, you can tell these stories about, you know, in set to these backdrops of technical details. Like Brian, the Dune, for instance. Dune had such a story about a family, and how they were betrayed and destroyed, and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately redeemed, but they did it as a family. The House Atreides,
Yeah.
rose from the ashes, and it's such a stirring tale, but it's such a human tale.
Yeah, especially
And it
when you get into things like, where Luke's uh fears that,
Mhm.
his his he's afraid of his destiny, because his
Right.
destiny is to become a genocidal tyrant,
Yeah.
and watching him kind of defend his kind of um attempts to avoid it results in
Yeah.
it.
Mm. Well, yeah, like the you're talking about Dune. You're talking about
I'm
or you're
talking
talking
about
about
Dune.
Luke's.
Luke
Okay.
Atreides is the
Yeah.
lead character in Dune, right?
Oh no, it's not Luke. His name's something different, but
It
it's
is
not
Luke
Luke.
Atreides. I'm sure it is.
It is. Okay. Um.
Timothy
We'll have to
Chalamet's
look.
character.
Yeah. Yeah. In the yeah. Okay. Okay. I don't think it's Paul.
Paul
It's Paul.
Atreides. I'm
Shut up.
sorry.
It's Paul.
Luke
Cause
Atreides is
yeah.
his son.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's like you're talking about, yeah, later on in the epic. Yeah. Um. But like Luke Skywalker, exact same thing you're talking about when um, he basically realized, he saw his hand was mechanical, and he saw that when he cut off Darth Vader's hand, he realized that, and he was like, "Yeah, this is your destiny. You're supposed to take your place by my side." And then he
Mm,
throws the lightsaber away.
yeah.
This has all been manipulated. This is all like this is your destiny, right? And he's looking down at his father, and the and he's like, "No, I'm a Jedi, like my father before me," you know.
Yeah.
And he throws the lightsaber away, knowing it's a death sentence, but knowing that he is making a different choice. And then he calls on his father to save him, because he can just sense his father's got good in him somewhere. That bit of faith. It was an act of faith on his part, and 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 that's what killed the emperor, was his faith in his father. And his like evil, scary father. But
Yeah.
he just sensed it was in him, and he had that faith that he was in there somewhere. And
Yeah.
and
Max Headroom in chat's correcting me. Paul's son is Leto. I don't know where Luke came from, honestly.
yeah.
Is there a character in Dune called Luke? I'm sure there is. I'm really sure there is.
Um, I think there's a Luke. I can't remember which one it is. Let me
Maybe I'm thinking it's Duke. Duke.
Duke. You're
Duke
probably thinking
Leto Atreides.
Duke
Maybe that I'm
Leto
getting kind of
Atreides. Yeah,
confused
that's
about
what
that.
that is. Hey, it happens. It happens,
Yeah.
man. It happens to me all the time. I do that all the time. What's up, Odin? Any sufficient advanced technology industries will just
So
bring
we were
Arthur
both
C.
wrong.
Clarke.
We were both wrong. It wasn't Ray
Arthur
Bradbury.
C. Clarke. Oh man, 2001.
Something I learned about
Uh,
Arthur C. Clarke actually today was we're
mhm.
talking about. I was talking about Dan Dare earlier, the British kind of Flash Gordon.
Yeah, yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke was a advisor, a scientific advisor to the writers of Dan Dare, and he even wrote
Mm,
some of the. He even wrote a story in the
right,
comic as well. So
right. Yeah, yeah. Dan. I've heard of that. I've heard of that before. These, especially these pulp characters like Flash Gordon and even further back, the oh Princess of Mars,
oh,
the
John Carter.
John Carter of Mars. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at John Carter of Mars, I mean, it was like a lot of it was a sweeping epic, but they didn't really nail a lot of things down as to how he wound up on Mars,
Mm,
how it works,
yeah.
uh, and why is he stronger on Mars than he is on the Earth, and became a superhero on Mars,
Yeah, but it's kind of
and
like one of the downsides of scientific advancement is that
yeah,
we do have probes on Mars
right,
that are like going
right,
around and just seeing nothing but empty desert, and there's
yeah,
no like critters or whatever
right,
walking around,
right,
and it kind of I am firmly against doing that.
mm,
As a
yeah,
like I'm just going when I say I'm not against it in like in principle, of course, we should explore other worlds.
yeah,
But I think, I think as a writer, I think it's important that we overlook these kinds of boundaries and we
hmm,
explain how. Okay, maybe there is nothing living on the surface of Mars. On the
right.
surface of Mars,
On the
you
surface
know,
of Mars, right?
maybe things can't live on Venus, but what if things can live in the clouds above Venus? You know,
Belmont, Belmont
I
Press.
see that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Kubrick left Clark in the dark when creating 2001. He did that to Stephen King too. That was his thing.
That's one of the things about writing science fiction, though.
Yeah,
You can't always have everything be well. It's least adapting anything. You can't really have
yeah,
everything be like for like, you know.
right,
Especially with
right.
some of the more difficult subjects that are really hard to translate across into.
Yeah.
Like,
Odin says, Kubrick probably left himself in the dark on that one. Kubrick left himself on the dark on that one. Okay. I think a very fascinating thing about science fiction, though, is the fact that science fiction is kind of like how mankind dreams,
mhm.
because a lot of the technologies that we have now were just speculated and they first appeared in the zeitgeist and appeared in like the cultural memory through science fiction, like the old translators and on Star Trek. I
Yeah.
mean, the idea that you could just like with the touch, and connect with somebody.
Well, the fact that somebody can just point something at me and tell me what my body temperature is kind of
Yeah,
it's only like 2 or 3 steps removed from a tricorder, you know, in Star Trek
yeah,
where they can just beep 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 beep. Yep,
right,
you've got Legionnaire's disease or something like that, you know.
exactly, exactly. But and you see this over and over again where a lot of the space exploration NASA did, uh, a lot of those ideas that they came up with, they got from science fiction.
Yeah,
Because when they went to decide how to get to the moon, this is something absolutely new. I mean, the idea of going to the moon was just absurd, but they made leaps of technology that were just incredible, and then they in with computers that are less than a pocket calculator now,
yeah,
they were able to take people from Earth and land them on the surface of the moon.
Well, the very first science fiction movie that was ever made was that French thing about
Yeah,
putting people in a cannon and then blasting them at the moon,
blast them to the moon. Yep, yeah. uh,
which
hold
isn't
on.
too far off from firing a rocket, which was invented as a weapon, the V2,
Right,
shooting
right.
somebody into the moon.
Yeah, yeah. And it was just really interesting, just how, you know, when you look at especially when the early days of like the NASA moon exploration, how people were like really fascinated with space travel all of a sudden. And you
Mm-hmm.
see that in the fictions, you see that in the movies, and you see that, and it was just like assuming that eventually we'd get to the stars. And because of that, it inspired such amazing pop culture and amazing,
Yeah.
fiction and things like that.
Well, I have a friend who, um, like science fiction has directly inspired him in his career
Hmm.
path. He like
Oh,
he joined the Navy because
hmm,
he's joining the Navy because he watches Star Trek and he kind of likes the idea of being
right, right.
in that type of environment. And of course, he's not going to be fighting Gorn or anything, but
No,
he's not going to be meeting the Borg. But
right.
he's got that aspiration of sort of living out his fantasies of being in a Star Trek
Yeah.
vessel.
Hmm.
And yeah, like science fiction is ultimately it is what you were saying. It is kind of like it's a dream. We all kind of the ancient Greeks used to write about their heroes and the great
Hmm.
battles and the gods and you
Yeah.
know uh, ascending hero people. A hero is somebody who ascended so that they could be amongst the gods.
Right.
Recognized amongst the gods.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, like we live in a sort of we live in a largely secular society nowadays, and I
Yeah.
think that ambition to reach the heavens and touch the face of God is very much
Yeah.
um, that's the dream of space exploration.
Yeah. Ronald Reagan's speech at the Challenger shuttle accident. Yeah, I know that one. uh, Hold on. Why'd you join the Navy? Star Trek made me do it. There you go. It can happen. It can happen, Bristolian. Um, well, yeah. When you basically, I think inherent into science fiction is exploration.
Yeah.
You explore ideas. You explore concepts. You speculate about the future. You speculate about um, our present circumstances, but I mean, something set in modern day, but somebody comes up with a technology that's impossible.
Hmm.
That happens all the time. Like Iron Man is science fiction. You know,
Yeah.
the stuff that he creates is just impossible. You know, he, if they could do servo motors and make a suit of armor in a cave somewhere, I
Yeah.
mean, they would have done it by now. We would have like suits of armor running around. But it's basically science fiction. But when you see this in comics, the comic strips, like you were talking about Dan, and you were talking about Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, are comic strips,
Hmm.
and so there's an intersection between science fiction and comics that has gone back to the very beginning, uh,
Yeah.
and it's still alive and well today.
Well, all the big Marvel superheroes are all scientific experiments gone wrong or gone right in some
Right,
cases.
right.
And so there is
Captain
that
America, Incredible
like
Hulk.
there's that science fiction element to it, especially with characters like the Fantastic Four, where I
Right.
mean their origin is very kind of pulp science
Yeah,
fiction, going up into
yeah,
space, getting blasted with cosmic radiation, coming back down, you know.
Right. NASA. Basically, they were NASA explorers that got blasted by radiation.
Yeah.
Uh, they were still trying to decide what radiation was and what the significance of radiation was. I mean, the bomb was less than 2 decades behind them
Yeah.
when they started coming up with this stuff. What would happen if somebody got hit with gamma radiation and
Well, we know
completely
today that
changed
gamma
them?
radiation is ineffective. It's nothing, you know.
Yeah,
But um but we talk
it's
about it
mm-hmm.
as like in Marvel comics, it's this radiation that's so powerful that it can transform you into a giant monster,
Right, right.
giant green monster. Although I think in the
Well,
Ultimate Universe they changed it to Gammer, Gammer, to
oh,
make
okay.
it more quote unquote accurate, you know.
Yeah, right.
Um, yeah,
They kind of used it like magic, I guess.
yeah,
That they didn't really understand it, so they just like, oh, it's radiation. Oh, okay.
yeah.
You get hit by a radioactive spider, you get very, very sick. You don't get superhero
And
powers, but
that comes around to a point that I wanted to make earlier as another challenge as a writer of science fiction
yeah,
is
mm,
using terminology that's already, for want of a better word, been uh, copyrighted, you know,
right,
or maybe not even like officially copyrighted, but
yeah,
borrowed, you know.
right,
Um, and like the word phaser, I don't think that the word phaser is property of Paramount Pictures.
right,
But if you use the word phaser, that word is directly
mm,
associated with Star Trek,
yeah,
you know. And
yeah.
if you use the word lightsaber,
Oh
that
yeah.
word definitely is copyrighted.
Oh, definitely,
But
definitely.
you know, anything derivative of it, laser sword,
Yeah,
you know, light scimitar, you know, there's nothing you can
right.
really, um,
No,
there's nothing that you can really that has the same kind of impact of what you're trying to get across, you know.
right, right. Yeah. Well, I mean, basically, I think in a way, uh, when you go to write science fiction, you are at the leading edge of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's closer to creativity than pretty much anything else because you have to conceptualize while you're creating,
Yeah,
and that can get really intimidating. You because you're basically creating something from the ether, anyway when you create. But now you're gonna have to pull the technical details of what you're creating out. You're
yeah,
gonna have to decide not only how or what happens, but why it happens and
yeah.
how it's possible.
I came into this kind of I had this problem yesterday
Hmm.
because I was talking to a friend, the same one that wants to join the Navy.
Oh,
And
okay. Yeah.
I was talking to him and I said, I want to create faster than light travel in my setting, but I know it exists.
Hmm.
It has to exist for the setting to work, but
Yeah.
I don't know what type of faster than light travel I want to use.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to be like any other faster than light travel that's been used.
Yeah.
I wanted to think of a new way of faster than light travel in science fiction. So
Hmm.
hyperspace lanes, I can't do because Star Wars. Warp,
Hmm.
can't do because Star Trek. Stargates, can't do because of Stargate. Um, mass drivers can't do because of Mass Effect. Uh, jump gates can't do. Like all these things they're all used, and I couldn't think of it like I couldn't think of a new way
Hmm.
to travel faster than light.
Yeah.
And I think that possibly comes down to me not being well versed enough in science.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do things like extra dimensional folding and slip space, because again, those things have been used. And so like you come up against this kind of deadlock where you creating something that's original when you've got a limited understanding of, for me at least, quantum physics. And I want to kind of throw all that out of the window, but at the same time I also want to have an explanation for how they can travel faster than light.
Right.
And I want it to be called something, and I want them to say things like, we need to jump to not hyperspace, but faster than light, FTL.
Yeah. Have something like Ender's Game where people travel between stars. They had normal time, but everybody else passed so much slower that when they got there, everybody would be 10 years older or something like that. And so it made space travel very punitive if you did it very often.
It's fairly similar to
right. Well, his name became an
Warhammer
epithet.
40,000. Huh?
Yeah, well, his name became an epithet in the time he was traveling, to where he was like everybody's Hitler, and so when he just kept traveling, and so everybody's like, yeah, but he's dead by now, right? He's he'd be over 100 years old, but he just traveled so much that he basically time traveled, or that he just didn't age normally. But that was a real interesting. Orson Scott Card. It's one of the scientific minds. Of course, he's been canceled, but he was definitely one of the geniuses. Let's say Gammer is how I would say it as a Bristolian.
Yeah, he's right. That's Somerset-ish drawl. Gammer.
Right. Gammer. How much of a crossover do you feel like there is between sci-fi and fantasy? That's a good question.
I think at the end of the day, most science fiction is fantasy. I think the fantasy genre as we know it in like the sort of post-Tolkien pseudo-European mythology, I think either a new word needs to come up for science fantasy, or we need to redefine what fantasy is, or or specifically pseudo-medieval European fantasy, or like even Conan swords and sorcery fantasy.
Yeah. Well, I read a sci-fi fantasy a guy's attempt at sci-fi fantasy the other day, and it was so derivative of everything. It's just like you just put everything in a blender and spit it out on the page. It's nothing unique, nothing like groundbreaking here. It's
that follows up with what his next comment actually.
Yeah. Sorry. No idea what is truly original. They're all variations of what has come before.
That's right. But then you like Bunny's saying, like you enter into the realm of stepping on other people's toes and being derivative. One setting I think does that really well is the Warhammer 40,000 setting. I call that syncretic science fiction, because everything in that series is very blatantly ripped from other things, and they were able to do that because it originated as a parody, and it still is kind of a goofy parody of science fiction. And
I've been told I need to read that series though.
The Horus Heresy?
The Warhammer series. I'm told
it's a tabletop game, but there's
novelizations. They're supposedly very, very good.
There's some that are very, very good. There's some that fall flat, but
in most things, things.
Like 40K does it because 40K gets away with it because it's been around for like 50 something. It's been around since like the 70s or something. So they've had enough time to sort of establish things and put their own kind of trademark on it, put their own signature on it. But if you're a new writer and you want to, like I was saying earlier, if I was to put phasers and lightsabers in a book, you've got to create new terminology, and you've got to
Right.
think up new ideas. But the English language, for all of its great, you know,
And yeah,
it's got some of
complexity.
all its complexity, and we've got so many synonyms for so many different words. I met an Austrian woman once who said like she loves English because she's just got
Mhm.
so much more variety in what she can say than when she speaks German.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and yeah, so like
Well, I think also one way to get some kind of something unique is to don't sweat it.
yeah,
I mean, everything's out there. Everything's been written before. Everything's been conceived of before. Uh, and just say, okay, all right. If I have to like some crossover, I have some crossover. But if I like venture so far out that nobody understands, you got to have touchstones. You gotta um like that movie Contact. Do you remember Contact?
yeah, I remember Contact.
Based on a Carl Sagan novel. But he did the faster in light travel and all this other stuff, and a lot of those concepts have been used before and conceptualized. But at the heart of the story was this meeting of this lady and the aliens, and then at the end of it, she's getting gaslit. Did this actually happen or not?
Mm,
And but when they met her as her father, and kind of like did interface with her as her father and say, we're watching you. You're not ready to meet us yet, but we're watching you.
yeah,
It was just basically a howdy. The whole entire thing was a howdy. It was a contact, right?
but
And
then the audio.
yeah,
She said she was there for 16 hours or whatever, and then the audio was
right,
16 hours
right.
long.
And then they're like, "Oh, you just blinked through the light and you came right out the other side." And then but then somebody's like, "Oh, by the way, the audio was 16 hours long. This
Yeah,
the
you know,
fuzz.
my my immediate thing with that is that the aliens knew that was going to happen,
Yeah,
and
right.
so they could have made it a bit easier for her than
Yeah,
like maybe explaining it or maybe giving technology that will suspend her within the with
right, right.
um yeah yeah Sagan's Contact was a good film. I liked it. I
Yeah,
haven't read the
yeah.
book unfortunately, but
Well, I haven't read the book either. Carl Sagan's hard to read. He's very convoluted, very
yeah.
difficult, very thick. Uh, it's a little too brainy and too high conceptual for me. I'm gonna be honest. I get bogged if I don't know if it's ADHD or something, but
Hmm.
if I think somebody's being too cute and being too explanatory, I tend to like skip over stuff. and uh, and so I don't I tend to I guess I mean I got the library of like books and books and books and books and books, and a lot of them are science fiction, but most of it's like stuff that were people kind of like were more about the characters, more about the what happens to these people than they were about explaining nailing down every detail.
Yeah. Well, Dune, which is, a cornerstone of science fiction,
Yeah,
came out of Frank Herbert reading a book about coastal erosion or something like that.
right,
And
right.
then he researched like coastal erosion and like desertification and stuff like that. Like
Hmm.
and he that's how he just kept on reading and reading and reading and conceptualizing
Yeah,
these ideas out of his academic research.
right,
And
right.
that's ultimately what science fiction is, isn't it? It's how you
Yeah.
get to it. I spend so much time. Um, lately, I've become fascinated with jet fighters.
Ah.
I've been
Hmm.
watching a lot of stuff on YouTube about like not really like F-16s and stuff like that, but like jet
Hmm.
fighters that they didn't build because of or like they only made them as prototypes. I find that a lot
Yeah.
more interesting than things that actually work.
Right. Like the X-25
Yeah,
with
and
the
stuff
forward
like
swept
that.
wings. Yeah.
Um, and like the flying pancake and stuff like that, and all these weird
Right.
planes that they
Right.
tried to invent. and and
Well, pay attention to what Germany was into towards the end of the war. They
yeah,
made some incredible strides
the
in jet technology.
the
That
America bomber
yeah.
and all stuff like that. Yeah,
Right,
um,
right.
yeah, like lunatic stuff.
Yeah, stuff that like jets that would like absorb the pilot if they
Well,
sprang a leak, things like that.
stuff like that. And I've
Yeah.
been researching a lot of that. I'm not going to go into why, but like I've been really became really kind of interested in, and I'm sitting here like trying to like design spaceships that don't that like
Yeah.
and obviously like a fighter jet isn't going to go into space, but
No.
the same principles have to apply because visually as human beings, when we
Yeah.
think of a starfighter,
Right.
it has to be pointy, it has to have wings, it has to,
Yeah.
not always, but for a good one,
Right.
it has to have certain elements. Even though
Yeah.
an actual starfighter would probably be closer to like a sphere or a
Right. Well, I mean, aerolons are a little useless when there's no air.
right.
But we like those visual cues. We like that. We like to associate with them with something on the earth.
Well,
Let me
Star Wars pulled a lot from like old World War II movies and stuff.
right.
And
Yeah.
all the X-wings and so on are actually made out of World War II model kits, so
Right.
which is why
Yeah.
everything looks real.
Yeah. That's true. Let me get the last few ones in here, and we'll call it a day, so we don't get too long. We could talk about this forever. I think
Mm-hmm.
we're pretty much. Um, yeah. Let me get these in, and we'll put a Long Morrow is a great episode of Twilight Zone. Yes, it is.
I've
I
not
remember
seen
that
that. I
one.
don't know what it's about.
It's like a sci-fi version of Long Live Walter Jameson. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a great point. Never thought it like that. It's better done than Walter Jameson. I guess that's subjective. And well, the main character is more likable for sure. Yeah. Um, yeah. Richard Matheson wrote a lot of those Twilight Zone episodes, especially the ones more sci-fi. But he brilliant writer, brilliant writer. Um, well, I guess when at the end of the day, science fiction's kind of how mankind dreams, and while it is challenging, it's also more rewarding in a lot of ways, because you get to set the tone for the future, of exploration for mankind in a lot of ways. These concepts that you come up with could be conceived of in the future, and maybe they're conceived of because of what you're writing down now. And so in the end, yeah, it's a bigger challenge, and yeah, it can get very intimidating, but it can also be even more rewarding than any other type of fiction. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And
Mm.
the 20th century is testament to that, and
Yes, it
21st
is.
century.
Anyway, thank you for Mr. Comics Aardvark for coming on. His links are below. I'll make sure his channel link is there before I leave here today. I'll get it in there. But yeah, he's got a YouTube channel. I think it's on his Twitter profile. Look for it there. And he's got to sign up for Aquila. All this art behind me is in that book. It's at least the pin up on that book. Um, and you are doing it in color, right? Or is this
No,
just black and
it's
white?
black and white on the interiors. The
Okay.
covers are color. Yeah,
Right. Okay,
yeah.
black and
Like
white
it's
interiors.
calling back to those old classic science fiction comics that were black and white.
Right. Yeah, it's a big throwback. Anyway, so thank you for coming today and helping me out with this discussion. Thank you to the fluffiest chat in all of YouTube. That's all we've got for the day. So, y'all have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Good night.
Tell me what's on your mind.